Forest Green, here they are. Give them a big hand right here.
Thank you.
And we have the clicker. Where's the clicker? Oh, here we go. You ready? Okay. So, Ben Murphy and Daughter Building Supply recently received a $140 million contract to expand their business. This is where Forest Green Consulting was brought on to help them make this decision. By following our solution, Ben Murphy can expand their business to the southeastern state and also present opportunity to expand westward. So first, let's look at our current operation. Currently, our headquarters is in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We have one DC in Atlanta, Georgia. Our product is being sourced from Shanghai, China to the port of Charleston, and our targeted market is the southeastern states. So our assignment for today is to determine a 5-year expansion plan across Southeast region for Ben Murphy and Daughter Building Supply. There's a few considerations we need to look at. Either route optimization, is it energy and cost sufficient? Warehouse location, does it allow us to access to our targeted market? Scalability, is there opportunity for us to expand after this 5-year? Implementation obstacle, dealing with things such as labor allocation. Strategic consideration, do we want to keep with our current plan or change anything such as the port or the warehouse? Market demand, how are we going to react to the demand after we expand? And other operational risks associated with our new plan. So now Mohammed is going to look at our decision process.
So the first thing we want to do is we want to have a decision process for this 5-year plan. First, we have our port selection, whether it's the destination of the port, whether it's the infrastructure, the berth size, the amount of TEUs we can handle within a year. Our warehouse network, we have proximity to a targeted market, whether it's our e-commerce or our high demand areas that were mentioned in the case. Our warehouse costs, whether we're looking at rent and compare and contrast our previous area in Atlanta, access to transportation. And another thing we want to look at is risk analysis. With this crime rate, labor, insurance, and regulation, being in the South, we do deal with a lot of less regulation, deregulation compared to other states. Operation network, this is the main part of our subject is implementation consideration, scalability, and our headquarters. So what we want to look at, this is the map that we have. Our current operation goes from Shanghai, China, all the way to Port of Charleston, and from there, it's about 29 days. From there, it goes directly to Atlanta, and it goes to these areas. The areas in the orange stars represent our high demand, and the areas in the blue near Ohio and near Dallas represent our e-commerce areas. But our plan is we're going to have it coming in from Shanghai to Oregon, Portland, Oregon. From there, it'll take about 18 days. We'll have a direct route on rail leading to St. Louis. We'll do a hub and a spoke system. From there, you can see it takes about 67 days on rail. And these are our spoke systems. Our first one's going to be in West Virginia, Charleston, West Virginia. Our second one is going to be in Chattanooga, Tennessee, best city in the world. And then the third one is going to be in Montgomery, Alabama. And lastly, our fourth one will be in Little Rock, Arkansas. Now we'll pass it on to Zach for further detail.
It doesn't hurt you, by the way.
So, port selection. As the problem said, Charleston's becoming rapidly overcrowded. So that led us to the question of why don't we consider, shipping into the West Coast, specifically Portland. So we found there's many benefits into shipping into Portland. As you can see, Charleston averages about 180 vessels per month, whereas Portland averages about 30 vessels per month. And I went on FreightToast.com and actually signed up for to get a container shipped to Charleston from Shanghai. Came up to about $3,500 per container, $2,700 per container in Portland. The big difference was the transit time. You can see 30 to 35 days average, Portland 18 to 20 days average. And then in Charleston, it would come off the boat, loaded onto a truck, and then go to the hub. Portland, it would go off the boat onto a rail car and then to the hub. And then you can see here the FreightToast Baltic Index. shows that on average over the last year, shipping into the East Coast is significantly higher than shipping into the West Coast. Now I'm going to hand it off to Trevor.
All right, so the reason we decided to choose the hub and spoke system is we feel like it can equally distribute our materials to our major markets. We have those targeted locations all throughout the Southeast, along with the two major e-commerce areas. As they stated earlier, we're going to use a rail system via Pacific Union. Once it comes off the port onto the rail, it goes straight to Oregon, from Oregon to St. Louis, Missouri. Centralized location to reach our desired markets. We feel like because of the way we've located our spokes and our hub, we can reach all of our areas within a 24-hour period via one driver, a team driver. So we feel like we can reach all of our major areas with this hub and spoke system. The reason we chose St. Louis as our hub, it gives us access, as I said, to all of our southeastern markets. It gives us also access to our future markets. We can branch out west, we can go towards the north by using that central location in the middle of the United States. All spoke locations can be reached via interstate from St. Louis. As you can see, I-70, 64, 55, and 44 in all directions. Gives good infrastructure to all of our spokes. It has a low congestion area compared to Atlanta. The population size is very similar. This inner city is about the same. The greater metro area compared to Atlanta is very relative as well. And this is also a strong backhaul market being in St. Louis. This is the warehouse rent asking square foot price. As you can see, the dark line is Atlanta. The lighter green line is a flat line, and that is Missouri. It stayed very constant over the past year, where Atlanta seems to be on the rise recently. This is the outbound tender reject index, St. Louis, Missouri being the dark line, Atlanta being the light green line again. This is over a year period, and as you can see, St. Louis is a little bit larger, but we feel like using a private fleet and our 3PL system that we can fluctuate these prices and manipulate them a little bit to make them more manageable for our team. This is the wait time in minutes. We're again the dark line, Atlanta being the lower line, so you can see we are a little higher in that area as well. But again, I feel like our team can manipulate those numbers through our own system to manage these rates better. So I'm going to pass it on to Martin for warehouse selection.
All right, so using the same criteria that we used to implement our hub in St. Louis, Missouri, the first warehouse we decided to implement was in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The outbound reject is at 2.59, and that's down from last year at a 73%. The asking rent price for a warehouse there would be at $3.75 per square foot. Detention is at 141 minutes. And down below you can see the infrastructure, the major highways that we would use to transfer our goods. The next warehouse we chose would be in Little Rock, Arkansas. The outbound reject there is at 22.09, down at 27% from last year. The asking rent price is $4.82 per square foot, and detention is at 165 minutes. The next warehouse we chose was in Montgomery, Alabama. The outbound rejects at 1080, down 64% from last year. The asking rent price for a warehouse is $4.50 per square foot, and detention is at 112 minutes. And lastly, in Charleston, West Virginia, the outbound rejects at 273, down 34% from last year. Asking rent price is $4 per square foot, and detention is at 192 minutes. And as you can see in all these warehouses, one thing that's similar in all of them was the crime, and they're all at a high rate. And next, I'll pass it on to William.
All right, so this is probably the question you're all asking. How are we going to implement this? You can't snap your fingers and all of a sudden change your entire supply chain operation. So our implementation strategy is going to be a slow and steady. We're not going to do it all at once. We're going to do it in parts. So we need to think about labor allocation, establishing our warehouse network, rent or buy warehouses, operation transition, contract negotiation with the ports and 3PLs and the rail lines, and our short-term operation until we finalize this implementation. We've created an implementation process. The biggest thing that we decided to do was, for the time being, we're going to keep the Atlanta hub so we can continue to service our clients and our contracts while we are transitioning to the supply chain. Our first thing we want to do is contract negotiation, warehouse rental. We don't want to have a permanent spot in our new warehouse locations and our spokes, just in case they don't work out. We need to test these out before we decide to make this a permanent home. Maintaining Atlanta hub, and then our employment allocation. We want to try to keep our employees internal, and if they're willing to move, we're going to move them. Then we establish our e-commerce warehouses, our remaining warehouses, and then our St. Louis hubs. While that we're doing that, we're going to do our contract negotiations with our port and rails, and then we'll start to dissolve the Atlanta hub. And we'll leverage 3PL utilizations to transfer our product from our spokes to our end user. And I'll pass it off to Lee to finish it us off.
So just to summarize our plan, we're going to choose the port of Portland as our port to import the product from Shanghai. We use a hub and spoke system with the St. Louis hub and the Little Rock, Montgomery, Chattanooga, and Charleston spoke. Our headquarters will keep in Chattanooga due to a labor pool, and insurance will look at the high crime rate. Yes, so now we would like to answer any question you might have. Thank you.
So, first of all, really pretty slide deck. It was sexy. It was cool. I like it.
Thank you.
Come talk to me later. You guys certainly represented real visual elements to your presentation, which I thought were really solid. I think you brought the story alive because you visually represented it, which is I'm a big fan of that. One thing that I wasn't clear about was your thesis or your decision to move and do your imports on the West Coast, in Portland specifically, and your thoughts on how that would, what is the plan to implement that, and how is that going to impact the rest of your operations?
Thank you. That's a great question. You know, it is a big deal to go from Atlanta, which is a big market, to St. Louis. The reason why we want to do this is because St. Louis gives us the option to expand our business to the west, to the north, and to the southwest. Atlanta, it's in the southeast. If we want to grow our company, if they want to grow their company, they need to think about changing where their hub is so they can reach the most amount of customers as possible. Yes, we are thinking down 5 years down the road, but we need to think about a plan how it will affect 10, 15, 20 years down the road as well.
I guess one of the things that I'm making sure I'm getting what you guys have, which is in the case. The case itself says that you've won $140 million worth of contracts in the Southeast to serve customers. But you guys seem to be wanting to move away from the Southeast. I'm just curious what the thesis for that is.
Yes, so just address your previous question when you asked about why we choose a west port. We want to leverage the lower container cost, first of all, and also the economy of scale when we transport by rail, less variance in the price during seasonal product. And to your question earlier, one of the things we want to look at when we implement this plan is, yes, as of now, for the next 5 years, we want to focus in the southeastern area, but we should also look at the opportunity to expand, reaching out to the west, because in the long run, yes, our customer is focusing on in the southeastern area, but since we are targeting e-commerce, this gives it a leverage to have a better national visibility. So create some kind of opportunity for us to expand after that 5 years.
If you don't mind if I go back to the slide. It's a lot of slides. Okay, so I understand the reason we did St. Louis is one, so we can target the 24-hour quick response systems in Ohio as well as Dallas. Another thing was we also focused on backhauls. So it's very important for us because usually 25% of backhauls are fulfilled and the other 75% aren't. They usually come back empty. So that's something we took into consideration when we kind of placed it close. Being St. Louis is close to the eastern side of all the states, and being where St. Louis is, we're able to fulfill all the southeastern regions and near the Ohio area as well.
Did you factor in the cost of transportation, the rail, what it actually cost to move the delta between going to Charleston up to Portland? Did you factor that in?
That's the one he was talking about when you did the port. When Are you talking about the transfer with
Not
the?
talking about the boat cost.
Yeah.
But the cost of rail to go, your customers are in the southeast, but you seem to want to use Portland as your port of choice. So your delta you're gonna increase cost on the west coast to the southeast.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that was factored into your presentation.
We did factor in the idea that we know that usually rail is about 20% less than truck in some situations. But the main thing that we did it was just mostly economies of scale and being able to send a straight Union Pacific line to St. Louis and to meet those markets. The problem that we had with our previous method was it would go to Atlanta, Ohio sometimes, Atlanta to Dallas, Atlanta to Little Rock, these different areas. So we took that into account. As far as the numbers crunching go, we didn't go into too much detail about that. We wanted to kind of get the bigger picture and outside the box thinking.
Yeah, I was thinking around the same lines. Great presentation. Did you guys compare, you have LA and Long Beach, the two biggest ports in the world. Was it cheaper to go to Portland or LA? I can't remember, did you just talk about LA or Long Beach?
We were thinking, we could choose Seattle, we could use Oregon, we could use somewhere, obviously Long Beach and the other areas in California are very big, but they have a very big transloading process. And the last thing we want to do is have more hands on your product, because the more likely you have hands on your product, the more likely it's going to get broken, stolen, and that comes with insurance and such things. So we looked at having an international container come straight from Oregon and come directly down so it can have less hands, because 87% of transloading comes from the Long Beach area in the nation.
And also address that answer is one of the things we want to target when we change our port is addressing the congestion problem. In Long Beach and LA, even as of now, they're still facing major congestion problems. So we don't think it would be smart for us to change to a new port and to somewhere with even more major traffic than Charleston.
Thank you, great presentation. Maybe one part I didn't quite get. So you're moving from the West Coast to St. Louis.
Yes.
And then what happens with all of those other locations? Those are your
So
actual warehouses in Little Rock and Montgomery?
Yes, sir. So it's a hub and a spoke system. So our St. Louis is sent straight there, and that's going to be our hub, and that's going to be my main area of sending shipments. And obviously Little Rock, Montgomery, Chattanooga, and Charleston, West Virginia are our warehouses.
And so what do you gain by having 4 or 5 warehouses versus 1 or 2? What was the thinking there, and what was the rationale behind them?
Well, 2 things that we did take into consideration is you have your lead time, so it's ability to get to the customer fast, especially with team drivers. You can get about 1,000 miles, 500 from each. So when taking consideration quick response systems and getting to the customer with quality and assurance.
Okay. And did you consider that you could actually probably get to all of those locations probably within a day or 2 from St. Louis?
Yeah, that's why we put St. Louis there. But
I mean, from just one location.
Just from
as
St.
opposed-
Louis?
Because you probably could do that from St. Louis, right?
As we mentioned earlier, St. Louis actually has a higher rejection rate than Atlanta. So if we need a quick response and we need to get a 3PL to pick up our shipment to take it to those areas, we have a high risk of not being able to find a freight. With our private fleet, we are focusing from St. Louis to our hubs. The spokes will allow us to have more visibility with what we expect, what our customers expect, and when they need it. So the spoke system allows us to increase our probability of getting our product to our customers.
Got it. And then last question, how did you use you showed us the detention at all of those locations? So you showed us the detention in all of those spoke models, right? So how did that factor into your decision making?
Well, the spokes detention rate was important because that's when we're going to use the 3PL from our spokes to our end users. And and that the trend right now is that it's all decreasing, so it's easier to find freight in those areas. So we are not running the risk of not fulfilling an order in those areas.
So 2 questions. One, I want to dig a little bit deeper on something that Craig was asking. Do you have any sense of volatility in rates for rail versus truck?
Actual prices for the rail line rate, but we do look at statistics like over the last few years. On average, as we mentioned, is around 15 to 20% less expensive than truck, and also during seasonal demand, like during during the time where there's more seasonal product, rail normally have a less variance in price than truck.
All right. And then the second question, maybe stepping a little bit out of the scope of the assignment, but any thinking about, you know, scaling outside of the Southeast as you chose St. Louis as your location? Just, did you guys think about where the company can go next?
I kind of touched up on that in my part of the presentation. St. Louis gives us great access to the Southeast, which is our more short-term, immediate action. But it also allows us to get access to those northern states, those western states, and a little bit more on the deep south in Texas, Oklahoma. In Atlanta, we don't have that option. St. Louis, in the long run, will allow us to have that scalability, the scope of reaching more customers.
And I mean, spitballing, right? What's the opportunity of reaching those other markets? What do you think the revenue opportunity could be?
Like in regards to how we sell our product?
Yeah.
It would be most likely e-commerce. They don't have the contracts of those resellers yet, like they do in the Southeast. So just like in Dallas and in Ohio, in Youngstown, Ohio, that's an e-commerce market. We want to be prepared just in case we have new e-commerce markets in those other states, western states.
Good, thank you.
Hey, yeah, I very much have to echo their sentiments on. It's a great presentation. If you could jump back to the slide where you were actually showing the hub and spoke model. Keep going back. Yeah, this one. So in terms of your point, Mohammed, right? In terms of out of the box thinking, I think it's really out of the box because essentially what you guys have done is you're recalibrating how your risk will be calculated, right? In terms of you're predominantly going to be risked, as in risk entity, you're going to be risked on your cargo. You're taking away because one question I did have is what are you guys doing with your private fleet? Are you keeping that or are you shifting completely into 3PL?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, currently in the short term at least, when we finally start in St. Louis, when we start utilizing that hub, we want to leverage our private fleet to get from St. Louis to our spokes because we know how much we need to replenish. We know when and how we're going to send it.
Cool. And in that regard, I mean, because you're using rail, cargo is going to be your biggest. Your PD and your auto liability are going to dismal. I mean, you're not driving those trucks all the way across or you're driving those trucks over there. You're going to start seeing a lot of risk around the actual property that you own in terms of the warehousing, things like that, which is really out of the box, really cool. My first question was going to be around the fleet, so thank you for clarifying that. It seems like a lot of this is driven around efficiency. You want to be fast. You really want to service those e-commerce hubs within an hour based on what you guys were saying. Have you taken into account and mimicking what they're saying, the cost to scale? Because economies of scale is great, but it's great when you're at scale. Mm-hmm. Have you actually taken into account what it's going to take? You said you're going to leave the Atlanta warehouse running. That's going to be a risk while you're upstarting that as well.
So one of the other opportunity we look at also when we expanding our scale is potentially help fulfill smaller business who are also in the industry of building supply. So with our bigger network and when there's maybe a seasonality, maybe possibly be a hurricane season, someone need those material, we with a bigger network will be able to react to that better and also help fulfill for small business.
Were you asking about just having Atlanta and building stuff, the cost?
Yeah, because you're gonna maintain. You're saying you're gonna maintain your southeast, and then start to expand your Portland Avenue.
Well, in my part of the presentation in regards to implementing this plan, the most important factor is that we're not going to dissolve our Atlanta hub right away. The reason why is because we want to test our plan out. We don't want to permanently just go ahead and buy these warehouses, go ahead and buy the hubs. We want to test these hubs first. If they work for what we're trying to do, then we keep them. Maybe one of these are not the best solution to what we're trying to do, maybe not the best route, and that's why we want to rent or lease these warehouses until we finalize this is what we want to do, this is the direction we want to go towards. And then that's where we may think of getting a permanent warehouse or a permanent hub. That's why we're doing it in steps rather than a final thing. Because if we do that, and it doesn't work out, you know, we're in trouble.
One more follow-up, and I just want to make sure I understand. Both you and the last crew were this idea of shutting down Atlanta, and I'm curious, from your perspective, why that's important to you guys. What's the thesis for shutting down one of the most important cities in the Southeast? What would you gain by doing that?
Well, one thing I could say, if you look at Montgomery and you look at Chattanooga, Montgomery can obviously target the Florida market and the Georgia market, and the Chattanooga can kind of charter the north of Georgia. So it's pretty much trying to reduce the congestion, get to our customers faster. This world is all about quick response systems, and you know, Atlanta does. I mean, driving here, Atlanta does have a lot of congestion. We kind of want to avoid that so we can respond to the customers. That's how a supply chain survives over time. And she can go.
Yeah, also, if you go back to the chart earlier, we're showing the rent price. You see Atlanta right now, for the rent price for warehouse, is an upward trend going up, while most of our other location is either decreasing or it's very stable throughout, at least from the beginning of this year as to now.
Did that answer the question?
Yeah, it's just interesting because both you and the former group have brought it up, and it isn't obvious to me seems like everybody hates Atlanta, and I'm not sure why. And I don't know that there is, other than it's an out-of-the-box thinking, I'm not sure what the thesis for, I mean, broadly, companies want to be closer to their customers, particularly in e-commerce. It's lower that cycle time, and it seems odd to me that both you and the other group would want to leave the largest metro center in the Southeast when that's where your customers are. I'm just curious, am I missing something in your explanation?
Well, another thing that we took into account, our first thesis was, so in Savannah ports, they're opening up a trail to the Appalachian port near Atlanta area, near this area. And we took that into account because he said, are we gonna send our vessel through the East Coast? Well, then we have to compete with the East Coast. If we send it through the West Coast, we're gonna have to compete against people who send it through the Appalachian Trail. So that can cause a lot of market disruption, and sometimes we want to be able to compete in that area if they have the rail coming from Savannah ports to near Atlanta, so we wouldn't be able to compete in that market.